I live in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm married. I've got several kids. My youngest son passed away 8 years ago. I've got 8 grandchildren, and I have a rather eclectic life. I'm a PhD scientist, former professor, business founder, entrepreneur, but I also have been very active in the faith realm. Done a lot of travel in Asia, doing itinerant speaking, leadership training. I've spent a lot of time in India, some in China, Africa, Europe as well. So when I have free time away from being a scientist and a businessman, I'm very often on a plane traveling the world somewhere. But I guess the reason that I'm really on here is that I have watched a number of your interviews, and especially like the ones with Bob Scott. So I have never met Bob Scott personally, but I really have found his fascinating. And the more that I listened, I went, yeah, I could tick a few of the same boxes. So that's why I'm here. But it's nice to meet you personally, even though it's via the airwaves. But glad to be on your show.
Good to meet you as well. And yeah, Bob Scott's an interesting character. He and I, it's funny how that whole podcast came to be. I got wind of his book that he published. Obviously, that's what connected me between him and IHOP and all of my research. I wanted to know more about the Kansas City Fellowship, and who better to go to than somebody who was there, who isn't biased and in favor of IHOP, KC, all of that stuff in the NAR. But we got to talking, and it was funny because you could tell the level of caution he had in saying things that were critically thinking, but yet wouldn't cause me to lambast him. And he didn't know me from Adam. He didn't know that my personality doesn't do this, right? But I was doing the same thing to him, and we were both just dancing around our thoughts, right? And he started, opening up a little bit more, and we got to talking, and we both came to the same point. There are many things that we like to critically think about that we could be totally wrong, totally off base, but it's an exploration, and to explore and understand and learn and grow, you have to make some mistakes. You have to go forward and just learn and make mistakes. And the funny part is people have been so trained to be so uptight and in this little bottle that you can't think outside. It's a box. You can't think outside of this box. If you do, you're suddenly doomed to hell, and everybody's going to, even in the main denomination, some of them will actually cut you off. I've actually experienced this in mainstream denominations. So there's some weirdness that happens there. And, having escaped a cult, I'll say it feels cultish, but once you escape it and escape that mindset and you're free to think about it, it really opens up the door to a lot further research into what it is that you believe and why.
Yes, yes. Well, I understand that notion of narrow, you're either inside of my box or you're outside of God's will paradigm. And I've experienced it in fundamentalist evangelical camps. I've experienced it in more Pentecostal NAR camps. I even experienced it to some extent in my childhood, raised Roman Catholic in a really large Roman Catholic family. And so I also experienced a sense of you're either in the club or you're out of God's will. And that happens, I think, denominational blinders cause people to fixate on what their, primary positions are. And if you deviate from that, then you're moving aside. I had an experience back in the 1980s where my wife and I were involved in an evangelical campus ministry. And that campus ministry sort of grew out of the Jesus People movement of the late 60s, early 70s. And so it had a lot of free-spirited ex-hippie people drawn into it, but they went from one ditch to the other. They basically became like Mennonite hippies. So they went from, just drug and sex and partying and frat parties, into the other ditch, which was let's dress like we're German Anabaptists, and let's all break our food the same way, and there was a certain structure to it that was very immature, wherein the elders of that organization were all very young. They were like in their 20s. Maybe the oldest elder was almost 30. So they were all very young people that lacked wisdom. They lacked gray hair wisdom. And so, they taught us a lot of good things, but it also got very authoritarian, and the individual had no agency there. You could not be an individual. And although it was a campus-based ministry, they were encouraging people to leave college, to leave without getting degrees, to leave without getting professions, because they had an end times globalist kind of view that it looked very much like, Hal Lindsey's late great Planet Earth, that there was an urgency to it all. And this urgency is the most important thing in the world to do, is to be an evangelist and see people saved and share gospel tracts. And that's more important than family. It's more important than anything else. And that urgency led to what I call a loss of individual agency. And one of the things I really like about your show is you're encouraging people, think for yourselves, examine it, go back and check it out, be a good Berean for yourself. So towards the end of that season, so that was 70s to 80s, I made a decision, because they had a one-size-fits-all box that they were trying to have all men plug into, that the gifts of the Spirit were defined as one gift. All men had to be teaching elders, period. That was it. And if you didn't aspire to be a teaching elder, then you were second class in that movement. And I stood up and I said, I don't see that in the book of Ephesians. I don't see it in the book of 1 Corinthians. There's a diversity of gifts. The Spirit gives them freely. And I said, I'm leaving. I can't stay under this. I can't stay where I have no agency, and my gifting and my calling, which may be not that, wasn't really honored and appreciated. And I had one of the brothers there. I said, hey, I'm leaving, and I just want to say, hey, let's stay in touch and have coffee. And I literally was told to directly, you and I have nothing in common but the weather henceforth. And you are listening to the devil, by leaving our sect, leaving our sort of cultic sect. And besides that, you're pursuing a PhD, which is also not good for one's mental health, and you're drinking from a bad fountain. And so this notion of insularity, to me, is antithetical to the gospel. It's just not right.